thank you everyone who coming out to this exciting, thought-provoking event looking at environmental justice in Black communities. We have a great panelist tonight, so this will be a great discussion we're going to be getting into. We will start off by doing our land acknowledgement, and I will take it to our council members, Natasha, to be doing the land acknowledgement.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before we start the event, the Community Climate Council would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territory on which we reside. With great respect, the Community Climate Council acknowledges that the region of Peel is situated on ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, Petun, and Attawandaron people, and most recently, the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also offer our respect to the Métis, Inuit, and First Nations peoples all across Turtle Island. We are settlers occupying Indigenous land, and we must understand that this region has been home to Indigenous peoples long before the forced settlement by Europeans. Climate action, as well as climate justice, is rooted in mending our relationships with the earth and its natural processes, as well as our relationships with those who were part of the land before colonization. Climate justice cannot be fully achieved if we are unable to account for everyone on Turtle Island. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. If there's a next slide. All right. Okay. For those who don't know, we are Community Climate Council. It's a youth-focused, nonpartisan organization who focus on advocating for climate action and community resilience, through instilling climate literacy, municipal relations in Peel region, and we currently have 25 members. So today, we have the pleasure of presenting a panel discussion about environmental injustice in Black communities. Our panelists includes Alicia Richens, Christopher Wilson, and Charmin Williams. There will be question and answer period at the end. So please, if you have any questions that you want them to answer, can you please put it in the chat box and we will answer them at the very end of the presentation. So just to start it off, maybe the panelists kind of introduce yourselves, your work that you do in the community, and what connects you to our work here at the council. So if maybe Christopher, since you have your mic off, so I guess you want to go first.
Now I know the rules. I got to be careful with that mic. Okay. Thank you, Jason. Thank you to the council for the invitation to speak with you today. My name is Christopher Wilson. I'm speaking to you today from Toronto, which is on the Mississaugas of the New Credit territory, and the territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. I'm the first vice president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, which is a community-based organization rooted in the labor movement, dedicated to giving a voice to Black trade unionists within the labor movement and advocating within the movement to speak on issues that are relevant to our community, including environmental racism and environmental justice. And that's what brings me here to you today. Part of our work is on a workshop that we've designed called Green is Not White, that speaks to engaging trade unionists in the environmental justice struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Alicia, your mic is off.
Sure.
So we're just gonna do it like that.
I figured that was gonna happen. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. Also calling in from Toronto. My name is Alicia Richens. I'm the Partnerships and Standards Manager at the Common Approach to Impact Measurements, but I think more tied to this event today, I work as a sustainability and social impact consultant, really trying to localize the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in local organizations and social enterprises, and making sense of that. And for me, the most important thing about this framework of the Sustainable Development Goals is that they're all so interconnected and interdependent, which really speaks to the theme for today, our environmental challenges and our, social justice, racial justice challenges, they're tied together, and we're not going to achieve either unless we, work on both of them. So I'm so glad to be here and get into it with you today.
Thank you, and Charmaine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Councillor Williams, or Charmaine Williams. I'm the City Councillor for Ward 7 and 8 here in Brampton. And I am the first Black woman elected to City Council. And thank you. You know, and some people would say just being here is impactful. But now that I'm here, I always want to make sure that my voice is being used to uplift people and do what's right in the community. And, you know, fight for equity and inclusion at in every single conversation. Because I'm here at the table, I can make sure I'm bringing in the voice of the Black community for sure, but also the voice of everyone who has been faced with marginalization and you know, exclusion. And so I'm here helping to make decisions for the future of those who will be living in the city in the next 20, 30 years. That's just how long many of the decisions that are being made at council take to come to fruition. And so I'm just happy to be here and have the conversation, hear from you, so I can make sure your experiences, your words are being considered when I am speaking at council. So glad to be here.
Thank you, and congratulations for making history for someone who lives in Brampton. So it's great to hear. So maybe one of the things we can start off by kind of define what is environmental racism to you. Like, is there, because I think like environmental racism is still a kind of topic that people are kind of confused about. So it made me a good idea, like, is your perspective, what do you define environmental racism? Is there any evidence of it in Canadian law, and how does it impact Canadian communities? Maybe Alicia, if you want to start.
Sure. So for me, environmental racism is a two-pronged issue. On the one hand, you know, it speaks to the way that certain decisions that affect the environment tend to get pushed into communities that have been historically racialized and oppressed and excluded. So that's where you get all of the industrial zones with all of the air pollution and water pollution and all that stuff is happening. And we tend to just, and when I say we, I'm talking about the collective majority white society of Canada, we tend to push that onto, you know, our already excluded and oppressed and marginalized, racialized folks. And on the other side of that is also, for me, the fact that those communities don't really get much say in how, you know, their communities are developed, how their infrastructure is put together, in, you know, the planning decisions that happen that really impact their day-to-day lives.
Yes. Chris, do you want to go next?
Sure. In terms of a definition of environmental racism, let me start with that. Dr. Ingrid Waldron created a definition that I think is a good starting point. She's the author of the book, There's Something in the Water, and a professor at the Dalhousie University and leading an Enrich project there that's exploring environmental racism. So the definition she used is environmental racism refers to environmental policies, practices, or directives that disproportionately disadvantage individuals, groups, or communities, intentionally or unintentionally based on race or color. The socio-political factors that enable environmental racism include poverty, lack of political power and representation, lack of protection and enforcement, and neoliberal policy reform. So that's a technical definition that we can use, but in the context of the work that we do within CB2, where we're engaging trade unionists on this discussion of environmental racism, different forms of environmental racism have been discussed, and I think speak to the lived experience of participants in the workshops we've been doing. So some of the forms that environmental racism can take include toxins in our workplaces or our communities, food insecurity, particularly looking at the work of migrant workers and exposures to toxins and farms. Contaminated water, we could talk about many different examples of that. I think about Grassy Narrows comes to mind. We actually consider police brutality a form of environmental racism because that's the environment within which we live. Climate migration that looks at the displacement of peoples worldwide, predominantly people of color, racialized people, as a consequence of climate change. Reduced access to green space, and gentrification, which is a very real reality in Toronto and Peel. So those are some of the forms of environmental racism can take. I'll stop there because you asked another question about policy and the law, but I can loop back to that later after I give space for other people to speak as well.
Thanks. So I'll jump in right after Chris. Great definition. You know, I think we have to remember environmental racism does mean can mean different things in the U.S. context and then also in the Canadian context. I think Black communities within the U.S. were subjected to very strict Jim Crow laws and attacks almost on every aspect of their lives. I think in the Canadian context, where we suffer from more of a subtle neglect, and I think where we have to be very mindful of you know, how things are impacting our community is basically how slow things move, or so how long it takes for things to change in a positive way for our community. So, and I think we can look at environmental racism through different lenses as well. You have physical, natural environments, political environments, economic landscapes. But for me, I really also like to look at it from a fourth, and that is like mental wellness lens. Because we know that people are impacted by their community and by their environment. And how do we care for those who are impacted by our Canadian system that tends to neglect our community? And so I think where I know we're going to continue on in this conversation, but I think we need to be very aware of that. Where within our Canadian laws are we not willing to make changes that or see our communities where predominantly Black people are living? How are landlords or how are developers in the area not willing to redevelop in ways that are positively impacting the community, uplifting the community, to make them feel that I can care for my space because the people around me making decisions for my space care for it as well. So I really do tend to look at things from that perspective here and especially here in Brampton, because if I'm not here to help navigate some of these conversations, then developments are not going to be very mindful of the people that are living in the spaces, and that's how we as a community get impacted more severely than other communities might.
Absolutely. And I think just shows like with environmental racism, there's so many different dimensions where you can look into it. And it just like one, so that a lot of times, sometimes people cannot have a hard time understanding and grasp because there's so many different stuff that you look into. So I'd even never thought about looking at the mental health aspect into it. Or Chris, like you mentioned the police aspect into it when I think about environmental racism. So it just shows like there's so many dimensions into it that we should definitely look into. But so like other question is like looking at, are these underlying systems in Canada which contribute to the uneven distribution of social and environmental impacts of climate change? So does someone want to jump into that question?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the question is, what are we doing on an individual level to reduce our own environmental footprints? Are we effectively identifying areas to live? I'm sorry, my son is running around the house. If you hear a thudding noise every so often, he's
I
No
think
need
this
to
running
apologize.
around
You're
the house.
welcome. No
No
apologies
need
this
to
day, yeah,
apologize.
this day of age, I don't
I
think
know.
there's no problem.
You're living at work.
I've been seeing him in the background. It's like, oh.
Oh, you see it, yeah. Cheese string, pajamas, you name it. There's always something going on. But you know what? I think it's a good thing to think about. Like systemically, if for those of you who are going to have kids in the future, you got to think about, you know, how are we impacting the system by making sure that we are really looking at how we impact our areas where we're living. Are we effectively identifying areas to live more sustainable lives and mobilizing to build stronger communities by building strong allies? And that's also another area I think systemically we need to be looking at. We also need to mobilize to get resources. We need to build cleaner and sustainable communities. And here in Brampton, are implementing SNAP, the Sustainable Neighborhood Action Plan. And that has been a great plan that is engaging many in the community to be a part of this process and also to learn how they can influence their own environment to make it better for their kids and to help that chain reaction. Because I really want to see us take more ownership and not be ignorant to the process, really, as individuals.
A quick question, because I didn't know about the SNAP program. So is this implemented by the city, or because like I'm also like I actually just did a panel about this a couple of days ago for PAYA, and we had CBC doing a SNAP program. So is this with a conservation authority, or is this just with the city alone
Yeah,
doing
it's
this?
a partnership actually. So with the TRCA and the city of Brampton coming together, and they've looked at different areas in Brampton where they can implement, and it was really effective over near the county court area. If you know where that is, it's like near the courthouses, near like Ray Lawson here, Ontario side. And so they were bringing it up to the K, E, and F sections in Bramalea. And if you're familiar with Bramalea, you'll know Bramalea is divided into sections. So if you live like near Avondale, Ascot, that's the A section, and it moves its way around. So that the whole development was of Bramalea was created in the 60s, and it was made to be a walkable integrated community where there are rec centers and store plazas within a 5-minute walk. There are pathways connected throughout the whole area. And they thought the K, E, and F sections would be really good for us to look at because one, it's going through a transition where some of these areas have structures that need to be changed to be more environmentally friendly, like our concrete waterways. So to answer your question, it is a partnership, but the TRCA has been really great in helping to, one, provide the funding to see this happen, but also using the city as well to help connect with the community to get them engaged in this program.
Sounds great. Oh, Chris, sorry.
No, don't apologize. I'm following your lead. So, in terms of underlying systems that contribute to environmental racism, I'll loop back quickly to your question about legal systems, and in particular reference 3 pieces of legislation. One, there's a bill that's currently been introduced in Parliament called the National Strategy to Address Environmental Racism, Bill C 2300. And this bill calls for a national strategy to address environmental racism in Canada. And this is one piece of legislation that CBTU, as part of a national coalition that was recently formed to confront environmental racism, is advocating for and supporting. So I encourage participants to sign the petition in support of that bill. Another piece of legislation is the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is really critical to stopping the disproportionate environmental impact the Indigenous peoples experience in Canada, and to ensure that Indigenous legal systems are upheld. And then finally, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act is a piece of legislation that needs to be strengthened if we're going to take climate change and climate justice seriously. So those are some of the pieces of the legal system that need to be improved and built upon. The other aspect that I'd like to speak to just briefly is that trade unionists, we look at our economic system. And the reality is structural racial income inequality is very real in Canada, and it has been very real for decades. Professor Grace Edward Galabuzzi uses the term Canada's economic apartheid, where it speaks to racialized people earn about 70 cents on the dollar compared to non-racialized people, and that gap becomes even greater when you look at it from a gendered perspective. And then also, if you look at income inequality, that's being highly concentrated among a very small number of very wealthy Canadians. And then when you look at precarious work and who's working in those frontline precarious jobs, it tends to be racialized workers, Indigenous workers. And that becomes very relevant when you're talking about environmental justice, because what COVID has really exposed is a disproportionate impact on exposure to the virus based on where you're located socioeconomically, and racialized Indigenous people, marginalized workers have been disproportionately impacted. So those two systems, the legal system, economic system, are very much reinforcing environmental racism and need to be redressed. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you breaking down those pieces of legislature for us, Chris, because I mean, I think the answer is yes, there are underlying systems of uneven distribution for social and environmental impacts of climate change. And we need to make changes for that. But just like scoping back a bit to like why that exists, you know, like the existence of what is currently Canada, going back to our history of, you know, colonization, imperialization, and, you know, indigenous land rights, indigenous exclusion and oppression has, you know, built a system in which now we are not equal. You know, who gets access to credit, who gets access to loans, which kinds of organizations get grants, which neighborhoods get the good schools and the good funding and all that jazz, really ties into that. So yeah, and no, the government is not doing enough. But like Chris highlighted, you know, there is great stuff happening, and as Councillor Charmaine also showed us, you know, at the municipal level as well. And yeah, that just makes me hopeful.
I just wanted to add to that as well. You know, the education system is another system that is going through reform, especially if you are watching what's happening in Peel with the overhaul, almost you could say, of the Peel District School Board because of anti-Black racism. And just think about the shift that is going to happen to students because we are teaching our students to understand the impacts of how they are being taught, and when you understand how you're being taught and how problematic it can be, you're hopefully going to shift to let's make some changes here, and we're going to be developing an education system in Peel, my hope, of one that is going to teach our future leaders to understand ways in which to mobilize, advocate for change, you know, the good old protest to policy, right? So,
Yep, I could understand from firsthand experience on Peel District School. Quickly, I think we were talking about, I think one of the biggest issues when we talk about that, it's like the academic and applied and who do they tend to push into those programs. Like my whole entire siblings have dealt with this entire issue of the counselor or the teachers like, oh no, I don't think you can handle academic, and then they push you into apply. And I always bring this up. The one time, and this was an issue I dealt with throughout high school in like science, math, English. The only time I never had an issue with this was when I was in applied math, and it was a Black teacher, and she's just like, you have a 95 on the score, you should not be here. And then she switched me into academic.
There you go.
So
that
those
is
things,
the key.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to say the system is created to do exactly what it's created to do.
There you go.
It's the people who are in the positions who are deciding if they're going to give the opportunity to you or not. And we need to have more of us in spaces and in places. We need to be the who is deciding who gives you the opportunity. It needs to be people that look like you and me, so that when you go to the bank, right, and you're faced with that person that's going to sign the name, they look like you and me, because that's the difference between back in the 60s and the 40s when people were looking for mortgages and stuff. They weren't, you know, that's why we had to come up with partner draws. And if you know what that is, if you don't know what that is, ask your parents. What is Sisu and a partner draw, right?
Exactly. I think that's sometimes we've had to stress why representation matters. Like I dealt with it firsthand. Like every single teacher, like, oh, you should stay in applied, or they're like, no, you shouldn't be academic. And I think it was like my mom dealt with this buffoonery with my older brother, and she's like, you're not taking him out of applied. You're not taking him out of academic. Like she went to the school, and I said, I had to hide this from my mom. My mom didn't know till I graduated because I know how she is. So, so I'm just like, I saw how she did with my brothers, and it was actually kind of worse when they say like, and this can affect like Black children. That he is gonna like my mom told, they're telling him he's gonna fail, he's not gonna.
Yes.
And then what ended up happening? My brother went to University of Waterloo for computer science. He's now
Wow.
working. He's now working at Google, buying a house now.
Wow.
And I just
Wow.
I just
Yeah. You know what? It's so true. It's such a
Mhm.
shame, and I think everybody who pays taxes should get really upset about any educational system that is willing to see their taxpayers' dollars be wasted. Like you have to get upset. We spend as taxpayers over $100,000 per student from the time they go into kindergarten to the time they graduate high school. That's how much it costs, over $100,000. Now think about all of the brilliant minds who are being streamed, who are being discouraged, and not coming out with a great being inspired to take on these positions to be the who. And just think about that. And they all look like us. So I'm really happy that there's a government now that's saying, okay, we're going to do something about it and change it. But now we all need to still keep our eyes out and keep watch of what those changes are looking like and how they're being made. And I think, Jason, they've removed streaming. Streaming has now been taken out of the education system, I believe. I have to go back and check my notes, but I think, they're about making better changes, and we have to be aware of that. I'm sorry, don't waste my money. We worked too hard for it.
Exactly.
I want to see
Yeah.
everybody come out with a PhD. Are you kidding me? If we're investing that much?
Yeah,
Yeah, I just
representation is so important, but like you're saying, Charmaine, there's also that other side of like changing the system itself. I have the great privilege of having been raised in Trinidad and Tobago. All of my teachers were brown and Black. All of my political, representatives were brown and Black, but we still have these problems in the structures that exist from
Right.
this British colonial past. So I think at the same time, yes, absolutely, we need more Black people taking up these positions, teaching us, et cetera, but we also need to like change a system that tells us that based on what your capacities are as a 13 or 14-year-old is going to determine your entire life's opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I found that so ridiculous because I didn't realize that only Ontario does this.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was like normal thing of all of Canada, and then we found out only Ontario's doing this, and then this like I know this like since I took me fighting to get into those academic courses because sometimes I didn't even realize I did because they push me into academic English. A lot of times English is like the biggest factor, and no one realizes that because to go into university you take English, and no one tells you these stuff. I had to find out halfway in grade 10, and I had to take summer. I was taking grade 10 applied. I said, oh, I had to take academic to go to university. So in the next one, I had to take grade 10 academic. So it's like wasting my credits just to like doing all this kind of stuff because the counselors don't look like you, and like I told you, the counselors will just tell you, like he told my mom, my brother will struggle, and I'm like ridiculous, even though he's making money now. But like, so, but that kind of aligns like we're talking about like the government's changing. Like, so how has the government? Do you think the government has done enough to like address environmental racism? Because recently because Chris, you mentioned like different bills are going through, and we're talking about also the changes to education. But how do you feel like they have done enough yet?
So no, in my mind, definitely not. I think that when you look at the last federal election, it's just an example. The language that Trudeau used was, we need to build pipelines to green the economy. I mean, that contradiction. I mean, I think contradiction is a kind characterization of that position, given the impacts of extractive industries, particularly on Indigenous communities. When you look at just metrics, government stated goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they've missed their already weak targets year after year in terms of trying to achieve even their stated goals. They're missing those. And then when you look at communities that are directly impacted by various forms of environmental racism, I mean, the fact that there are boiled water advisories on First Nations communities across this country is inexcusable in a country as wealthy as Canada, and can't be defended. And quite frankly, that's something that the government could be doing something about immediately. And so in my view, no, the government isn't doing enough and isn't taking this challenge as seriously as it needs to be taken in order to affect real change. And just looping back very quickly on this question about representation in space, I wanted to thank the council again today for creating this panel, because even within the environmental justice movement, very often the spaces where these conversations are being held are very white spaces. The fact that we're even having this conversation today is a form of resistance in my view. And again, I commend the council for that and raising these important questions. Thanks.
Agreed.
100%.
Yeah.
I guess we all agree it's not enough. That there's some stuff that we can do more. So is there any? So what should they do? So in your opinion, what should they do? What are steps that they should try to address environmental racism, to eradicate it, get rid of it altogether?
You know, for me, I always say it's like the body. You have to take care of the main engine in order for all of your other limbs to work well. Take care of your heart, your brain. Um, and I think when it comes to our government, putting so much emphasis on our government to make the change, we are going to become very exhausted. Why? Because the government itself is broken, and they need to do the government, like I could say, even on a municipal level. Yeah, there are challenges. You know, I'm the first Black woman in this space on this council. They don't know how to deal with another Black woman because they've never had another Black woman on their council. And I came onto council being a vocal person advocating for people. And the spin that happens, you know, and the attacks that come at me is an attempt to silence me. So when there's motions being moved that to change expense policies because they don't like that I mailed my constituents to discuss an issue that was coming up at council, that's an attack on my ability to connect with people. Then also changing bylaws for a please slow down sign, that's another attack. So I've had 3 attacks on me that have happened. And so the question is, if they are stopping me as the Black woman from connecting with my community and putting a spin on it to hopefully, in their minds, get me off of this council, then whose voice is going to be there to represent the Black community, right? So we have to think about how are those attacks happening at other levels of government? And that's why it really falls back on us as taxpayers, as community members, to become engaged and say, I think there's something wrong in this area and we need you to do it, because if you don't, then we're not going to put you in the position to make decisions for us. So it does come down to us having these conversations, for one, I think is so important, because the more of these panels reveal that we need to be more involved and we need to get more people involved, that is a good thing. And that sends a loud message to our government that you need to clean up the stuff that you're doing in there to prevent our voices from being heard.
Absolutely. You know, at the one hand, we need more representation in government. We need more political staffers that are racialized. But then we need, as the community on the outside, we need to be supporting them by advocating very loudly for what they need. We can't just be sending ourselves into these very toxic work environments, just, you know, killing ourselves to get this work done. There's a lot of emotional labor tied to every single thing we do as racialized people.
That's right. We get tired.
Tired.
God, I'm tired. I'm tired. I've been doing this 2 years. I'm tired.
Very tired.
But
So
I
we have no
can't.
choice.
You can't.
Stop.
I have to
So
keep
we have
going.
to keep going.
Exactly. You gotta keep going.
Exactly.
The other piece that I think that the pandemic has really revealed is the capacity of the government, if they choose to intervene in the economy. I mean, before COVID, we couldn't have imagined the degree of government intervention that we've seen in the last year, when we've seen lockdowns across the country, direct income supports,
Mhm.
addressing issues on a scale of government intervention that we hadn't seen in years. So this notion that there's nothing we can do has really been exposed as a lie. There's a lot that can be done
That's
if
right.
there's the will there to do it. And that's why, for all the reasons that you're saying, it's a question of how do we build that will to affect the change that needs to be done now that we know it can be done. And so one of the things that we advocate for within CBTU is, quote unquote, a just transition to a green economy, which has to be inclusive of racialized and indigenous peoples, because it's possible in theory to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to a sustainable level, but at the same time reproduce the same systems of structural racial economic inequalities. And so in our view, we need both government intervention, but using a critical race analysis that ensures that our voices are heard at all these different levels that we're talking about, whether community or government level.
That's right.
Absolutely. We need to remember that, climate change is just as urgent and just as much of an
Yes,
emergency as COVID-19. We
exactly.
just can't see it the same way, but it's gonna
That's right.
hurt us so much worse.
That's right.
And I think that's the importance, though, because you know how extremely dangerous it is for us to be neglectful. Because remember, we're in a Canadian system, right? And I do feel strongly about this notion of neglect, because if we, there are so many different ways. Think about it. Lobbyists get paid a lot of money. Let's talk about that. Lobbyists get paid a lot of money to convince you and I that a product is a great product, or a way of thinking is the way to think. Imagine if we had people invested in paying to see those same messages about environmental justice
Mhm.
in front of our government. And I'm talking, like, think about the cigarette companies. Remember back then, cigarette companies would spend millions of dollars to tell you that cigarettes were okay. Imagine if that same money and investment was made in environmental justice. Think about that. What would things look like? How would we be teaching in schools? What kind of programs would be out there for people to learn and engage? So I think we as people, if we are really serious, we could find ways. Like you said, Chris, if there's a will, there's a way. And
Mhm.
also, it takes a lot of money, and where the
Yes.
money, yeah, right. And so,
Yep.
do we have the platforms and people who are willing to invest in making sure this message is heard?
So important. And just even building onto that, since we're talking about how to get involved. So, what does the future of climate change and environmental justice hold for racialized communities, both in terms of threats and opportunities?
Hmm.
That's a hard one.
Let me, I'll jump in first. Why not? I'm going to start with the opportunities piece. Um, Environmental justice is an issue that really breaks down borders. It's really a global issue, which creates an opportunity to build solidarity across communities, across countries on this issue of environmental racism. I think of my own um, personal experience. I have family who live in the Bahamas and that was devastated by hurricanes as a result of climate change. The GHG emissions in the Bahamas are probably some of the lowest in the world, but the impact of industrial pollution has that global impact where they're affected directly by climate change through devastating hurricanes. So the ability to build connections across communities, across countries, is really present now in a way that you didn't necessarily see on certain other issues affecting our community. So that's one opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what I was talking about earlier about the allies. How are we going to create allyship? Because the interesting thing about here, if we look at Toronto and Brampton, for example, um, because our communities are quite integrated, if a developer wanted to develop something that was going to be extremely horrible for our environment, it doesn't just impact the Black community, impacts white communities as well as South Asians. So it really does cross all of those lines. In with regards to impacting people of different communities. And so we have to come as a united front to say, environmental injustice does not see race, and it affects us all. That message has to come out. And because so take Brampton, for example. 95% of the Black community are taxpayers, which means they are homeowners. And Brampton was created to be a city that made it possible, that made homeownership a possibility. And so that's why you have Brampton being a place for the Black community to say, we are creating generational wealth. Our homeowners. This is the place where we want to see our kids do well and grow. So you have to be there. We're more aware of how and I actually want to just backtrack. We're more aware, but also if you come to council on a Monday night, when we have community consultations, where the community can come out and say whether they are for or against the development happening in their area. I love those meetings because I don't just see one community coming out and saying, I don't want this development here. I see people from different communities who have a stake in the city saying, this is going to impact where I'm living. And so, the future really is going to rely on allyship. I believe with what Christopher is saying, and we need to start saying, how can we make the message relatable so that everybody understands the importance of this fight, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it is. It is.
you know
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, allyship and community mobilization, just like coming together as community, like we see right now in the response to COVID, mutual aid, community gardens, community
Right.
land trusts,
Yes.
just holding that economic and social and political might together. And as you're saying, council, like show up to council and make a deputation,
That's right.
Take action and speak louder.
Absolutely. This is your future.
Yeah.
But
On the,
Sharman,
sorry.
oh,
No, you go ahead, Jason. You
I'm
go.
just like speaking like gay involvement council. Because you mentioned about one of the issue earlier about the issues that you were dealing with in council. Were you saying they had a problem you reaching out to your constituents about? If I
Yeah.
that to me, I did like this, like really? They have an issue
Yeah.
that's a part I assume that you want the community to be involved
hmm
in.
So yes, it was early on. And I'm a practical thinker, solution focus. I guess I practiced solution focused therapy when I was working as a therapist in mental health service. So, I think it's important for us to come up with, solutions to problems that are tangible. And every level of government, I think, needs to think that way. So we had come off of a summer during the election of extreme gun violence. And I know in Toronto, they had done a gun buyback program. And I said, Brampton has never done one. So why don't we do that? It's a way for the community to, encourage their neighbors if they don't have any, if they have firearms that they don't need. This is an opportunity. This is a city saying, let's do something about it. So I was pushing for that in council. And at the time, we were able to use the corporate budget to mail our constituents, or to just mail things. It's a corporate budget. When we started, we were talking about switching to a political model, which means political models, we would be using our own constituent budget. Well, we weren't planning on switching to that until April 14th. And we were doing the discussions around, guns in like January, February. So anyway, I mailed my constituents, because that's what we're allowed to do. We're supposed to connect about, being able to delegate if you want to come to council, and here's the process. We're working on doing the gun buyback. And so I did that. And members of council said that I was wasting taxpayers' dollars. And instead of, so they ended up moving a motion to backdate, retroactively change the date for the political model change to March 27th rather than April 15th, so that the money that I spent on the mailing would have to come from the political, my constituent budget to pay it back, rather than the corporate budget, which I was allowed to do anyway. So yeah, how can you rely on the Black community to get ahead in government when you have some people who are moving motions to prevent you from doing your work, to prevent you from making changes? So that was a big issue. They also didn't like that I have a consultant, or had a consultant. So they moved a motion to remove consultant usage from counselors. So that's been removed from the expense policy. And then also with the please slow down signs, my signs have a website that say pleaseslowdown.ca. And if you were to go to that website, you'd see a picture of me saying City Council Ward 7 and 8. Well, council thought that was a way of promotion, so they moved a motion to ban any elected official or candidate from having a lawn sign on their lawn.
Wow.
And that actually ended up banning election signs. So that bylaw had to get changed again. So the bylaw has now been changed again because they realized that you can't actually ban election signs, because other elected officials were prevented from putting up Canada Day signs, or groups who wanted to protest a certain issue weren't able to do that. It's been an interesting ride, let's say.
That's why we need you there.
Well, you know what? Yeah, absolutely. But it just highlights to me how important it is to have community being aware of what your elected officials are going through, the ones that look like you. And if they are saying, well, how come she's not able to do this and that? Well, I'm fighting these battles as well as keeping my eyes open on what's going on in the city. And I'm trying my best. And I signed up for this, so I do not at all regret that these battles that I'm going through. But I'm here, and I'm a strong Black woman. And
There you
yes, I
go.
get angry, and that is okay.
Absolutely.
That is okay.
It also just reminds me of the fact that I made sure to subscribe to all of my representatives like newsletters, so I get those updates about like what are they struggling through as MPPs, as my MP, as my city councilor, and what do they need help with, so I can get involved, like you say, because the system of exclusion is going to fight change. It's going to fight reform, and we need more people like you doing it, and we need more people like us just showing up and making that noise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you, as an elected official, Alicia, thank you for doing that. Honestly, it's appreciated. And thank you. This council doing this work and having these conversations is so important. All politicians need to be willing to listen. Canadian politics is interesting, and I just find that if you look in comparison to, I guess, politicians in China, they are engineers, doctors. Other parts of the world, you have politicians who um, are experts in their fields, right? But in Canada, a lot of politicians just look at the background, right? Where are they coming from, and who's holding what portfolios? A lot of lawyers are wonderful, and I appreciate lawyers. Oh my gosh, I do. But do we need every single politician to have a law background? Because lawyers debate everything, right? But we need people who know actually how to implement and how to extract from those debates and find solutions, and also not try and silence people when they give an idea or a possible solution. Like, if your kids came up to you, or somebody young, or child came up to you and said, well, I think it would be a great idea to put basketball nets in the middle of our streets, you're not going to tell them that's a stupid idea, but you're going to say, that's a great idea, but I wonder what would happen if that car hit the basketball net? What if we were put it at the side? That's a great idea. That is collaboration. That's working together, right? That's how we have to start making real changes. So I could go on and on. I don't want to hold the space too much, but we need experts. That's why I'm like, come on, guys, if you're interested in something, get in the field, become an urban planner. You know what I mean? Like, I need you at the table to help guide a lot of the politicians that just know how to debate things really well.
Yeah, I think even from personal experience, I think that's so important because just talk about the politics. I think Canada, but obviously we're not extreme like the US because I call that a clown show over there as entertainment. But like I got the same thing like in the US, like you said, like other countries they have experts in the field that are getting involved in it. And I think like a one aspect of it for the environment, for my personal experience, when I talk to some people, they kind of like, oh, not politics. They want to work in NGOs and stuff like that. Like they don't like. I feel like for the environment, that's where your mindsets tend to just go towards that. If you want to just go to the NGO world, not really the political world, because I feel like we need people in both sides. That's what we need people at both.
That's right.
Both. Like talk about my background, undergrad, I studied public policy, and I took some stuff for environment, but it's like I never think I was an expert. Yeah, that's like I think I just know I'm more knowledgeable in public policy than I'm in the environment, and that's why I did my master's in environmental studies, ecological economics, kind of combine both the economics and public and the environmental side.
Nice.
Get good knowledge about that. Maybe I can go into that. That's something maybe people would say I can do it. I don't know yet.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But that's even like in my mindset, I'm gonna work at NGO. I'm not gonna. That's like that was like my mindset. It's like I'm gonna work at NGO. I'm in the environment field, but it's like I'm this area as well, and I have done work in the government before. But that's kind of my mindset. It's like I probably that's where I'm gonna be in the future. But then you're realizing, like you said, like it's lawyers that are probably have no background in the environment that are making these environmental decisions, or even talk about memory their background. Their lawyers, they're probably very privileged, and they never even been into these communities, and they're making decisions about these communities that they have nothing about. So we need I think that's the thing.
We need more doctors talking about healthcare. We need more teachers. We need more psychologists.
Exactly.
We need more just
That's
regular
right.
people off the streets who know what's going on in their community.
That's right. Exactly. Because think about the perspective that is getting argued. Sorry, my son wants Rice Krispies.
Nice.
Love it.
No, yeah, you're at, like, think about what's being argued, and it's the caucus, and provincially and federally, it is the caucus members who are discussing things at cabinet, right? They are the ones who are debating issues. And when those debates happen, the party makes a decision, and that's what they walk out the door with. So if you are a cabinet member debating things, and you only have information that was given to you, and not a good rote background on what you're discussing, how are you going to really argue the perspectives, effectively? And that's why I just say, I appreciate the journey every politician has gone through to get where they are, because it's not easy to win elections. I just want to make sure whoever's coming forward to do it, you're not doing this for yourself to be famous. You're doing this because you are a public servant. You are helping the community.
Absolutely.
I feel like that's usually lost, unfortunately, in today's politics. They kind of just see the community. They don't see themselves as serving for the community. They just see them as just a job that they're just gonna do. But it doesn't seem like a lot of times policymakers, politicians, probably not. I think that's just been lost. It's like you're a servant to the community. They're the ones that their taxpayer dollars are paying your salary.
That's right.
The point you make now, I think, really links well with the earlier question you raised around threats. What are the threats of environmental racism? And I think about the COVID as a form of environmental racism. And really it's become a question of life and death. I mean, we've almost normalized death. What is the death count today? Oh, it's lower. It looks like we're making progress. No, people are still dying. And people are dying. And when you look at the Ford government's response last summer, the numbers are low. you know, I'm going to speak to the community, which was not our community, and say, let's reopen the economy, which resulted in a second wave, right? And so, you know, the point that you're making, I think, is a good one, which is who's listening to whom when policy decisions are being made. And the reality is there are a number of policy decisions that are being made that aren't being made in response to the needs of our community. I know from a labor perspective, one of the demands we put forward, which shouldn't even be a demand, but can we have paid sick days? Can workers have a certain number of paid sick days during a pandemic where if you go to work sick, you could kill somebody potentially? And the Ford government didn't support that. And so it really speaks to who are you speaking for Ford, because it's not our community. So that's definitely a threat, and also speaks to your point about how we need to make sure we make those connections and have representation and hold our community accountable for giving voice to our needs.
Absolutely. I remember having that
Yes.
debate in council, actually, you know, with the sick days. It was during the
Yeah.
summer, and I moved the motion to say, can we write for government to request for additional sick days?
Right, great.
Yeah, because it to me, like, it's a solution.
Yeah,
It makes sense.
right.
You want people to feel confident that if they get sick or they're feeling ill, they can go home and get better. Instead
That's
of,
right.
you know, in Brampton, you have a lot of people saying, I need to work
Yeah,
because if I don't, we don't eat,
exactly.
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah, so much
Absolutely.
of our response to
Yes.
COVID has been about these very material needs, you know, like you're sick, you should have sick days.
Yeah.
Everyone should get universal basic income because, you
Yes.
know, your
Yes.
capacity to survive in the system shouldn't depend on, you know, your status of employment.
That's
That's right.
right.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Yeah, I think with
You
this
know, I
to this
even
top.
the motion in. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I think there
I
was
was just about to comment.
Oh, no, I was even saying I moved a motion about the um, shutting down direct flights to the Caribbean and back, and and I said, well, think of the impact. You know, we have farmers that are coming up
Hmm.
from the Caribbean and
That's right.
Mexico who
That's right.
their home is in Mexico or in the
Yep.
Caribbean,
Yep.
and now you're putting Canadians even at more risk because they have to go through the US where they know cases are higher and into Canada and then
Mm.
possibly faced with a hotel stay that is expensive, you know,
Right.
and then think about the journey back. Now,
Yeah.
you are leaving from Canada, going through the US, putting yourself at more risk to enter into the Caribbean where their health system and economic system has now been set back 15 years
Hmm.
because of COVID. So,
Yeah.
you know, I just said if we're going to be looking at shutting it down, like these countries are not your playground, these are homes,
That's right. That's
right?
right.
So,
And
and
these
I
are our
think imagine if
essential
somebody
workers.
was there,
Yeah.
our essential workers. And I say, think about if we
Mhm.
were there at the table in that caucus meeting, we would have been able to articulate that,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think like this top, especially
Thank
this
you.
topic, aligns with me a lot because like grad school, like I talk about, Elisa knows about this because we were the same grad school together.
Okay.
But
Okay.
but like we like my area was like on well-being, ecological economics and knowledge of well-being, and like looking beyond, look at economic growth as a measure of well-being in society, because I think that's a whole problem, because along with which we just, I think COVID-19 makes it crystal clear there, what do we prioritize, human health or our economic
Exactly.
structure, and who do
Exactly.
we, the government tends to do, they go look at our economic health, and like you
Yeah.
even said, Chris, they kind of just normalize that. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and that's just like what we need these changes for, and this is like what
That's
something I've been passionate for, that we had to look, like that's what my original research is on, like for Ontario, like looking beyond economic growth as a measure of well-being, as health has
yes.
a big
Yes.
factor into it. Like we even
Yeah.
Mhm.
talk about the issue of like healthcare not, has always been underfunded,
Yes.
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 and look what that has cost us
Yes.
in this pandemic, because
That's
we
You know
right.
what?
underfund.
Actually, it's interesting though. When if we look at our healthcare system, it hasn't always been underfunded. It's the money just hasn't been spent where
Mm,
it should be spent. Hospitals especially get millions. They were getting millions and millions of dollars, but instead of putting it in places where, if there's a certain amount of money that's allocated for like mental health per se, um, if at the end of their quarter they have to take the money from other places to balance out their budget. This is how hospitals work, and oftentimes where money would be taken from is mental health sector,
mm,
right? And they took the money from there to rebalance the budget into different areas. So I think there's sometimes we have to look at how is the government really spending the money that is being given to this healthcare
mm,
systems? Is it going into the right places?
right.
We know our community is usually most marginalized with a
That's right.
Eurocentric healthcare system,
That's right.
right? And like I keep saying that Canada we neglect, right? So how much money was actually being put into a preventative structure?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Right? Not
absolutely.
much, right? And
Yeah,
most of it is all reactive.
yeah,
The Canadian system likes to wait until you're having the heart attack before they're
yeah.
saying, okay, we'll get you some help.
That's right.
So for me, whichever level of government, because of my mental health background, I really think it's important to be at that table to say, where's the money going? How is it being spent? If we get when we get the second phase of William Moltzler built in Brampton, which is coming, it's going to be geared towards mental health, is going to have the whole psychiatry wards there. Um, I want to make sure that's the money is being spent in these areas to make sure our city is healthy. How are we can we get more money for recreational systems here in Brampton? Like, can we? Because our rec systems here is what encourages people to get out and be active, and
That's
that
right.
is going to have less of an impact on our healthcare system.
That's
And
right.
you know what I mean?
Yep.
Just a fun fact, and it might shock you because it's not that fun, but our government of Ontario did studies, and last term, I think it was 2017, this came out that when people, $16.5 billion could be saved in our healthcare system if people were more connected to their community.
Hmm.
Isn't that nuts?
Mhm.
Yep.
Just being more
Yep.
connected to your community, your environment makes you live better. It,
I believe
it
it.
leads to better mental health,
Yeah.
wellness, and physical health, right? So what's going to help us be more connected to our community? Getting
Yeah.
outside and taking notice,
Yeah.
and that's why another reason why this conversation is so important. Our
Yeah.
environment impacts our health. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been sold this, capitalist lie of scarcity and
There you go.
austerity, and we just
Yeah.
never have the money. And
Yeah.
going back to ecological economics too,
That's
Jason,
right.
like our obsession with GDP growth is the
Yep.
reason we're in this problem in the first place.
That's right.
And
Mhm.
as climate change progresses, it's literally the Earth system contracting our capacity to grow our economies.
That's
Because
right.
the Earth
Absolutely.
is literally telling us, like, sorry,
Yes.
we have no more space for that. So
That's
That's
right.
everything is
right.
about to come crashing down on us. So
That's
we
right.
really just need to, change these systems and forget this nonsense about we just never have enough money for these
Yeah,
things. Like money is
Exactly.
it's fiction. Like we make
that's
it up, we
right.
Yes.
print it. Like just spend the money.
Yes.
That's right. How is the money being spent? The
Mhm.
education
Yes.
system, how are you spending that $100,000 on
There you
that
go.
child? You know what I mean? Healthcare system, $16.5 billion. Why do you think the government now has been able to find $3.5 billion to invest in mental health over their term?
They found the money.
It was, and it's like the same budget. It's there. So now the
Mhm.
Yeah.
question is, how are you spending that $3.5 billion? How
There
much
you
is
go.
going into programs on a grassroots level
That's right.
to help? Because they found that because of the mismanagement and how money was spent, more and more grassroots organizations developed. That was a result of money being spent up here, but not providing the need. So everybody's like, well, I got to fill that need. I'm going to
Yeah.
open this organization to help these people,
Mhm.
right? So we have them now. How are they getting paid the money to actually do the work that they want to do and connect with as people, so that they can live? Basketball
Yeah.
programs, you name it, you know. Let's fund them. Let's give them the money. They'll do great things with them, I swear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely agree with all this. Well, it was like I kind of think we kind of answered my last question.
Yeah, what
Yes.
changes are needed? That's
Yeah.
right.
Yes, like what
Yeah.
changes are needed
Yeah.
to. So I don't know if there's any other added point. I think we probably answer all of that.
Yeah.
Can I just
Um,
do my one shameless plug, right?
go
Please.
ahead.
Do
About
Go
it.
urban
ahead.
Go ahead.
planners. Well,
No
no, about
shame.
urban planners. Alicia, you do this great work as a consultant. We need more of these. We need more of you out there. Urban planners identify the community needs, develops long and short-term plans to create growth and revitalize communities. That's amazing. That's great. I'll be there in a second. You know what I mean? So can we get more? I need to see more urban planners standing in front of council who's working with developer ABC and saying, this is a program, this is a development that's going to work, and here's how. Because then I know that the developer that has a conscious mind about environmental justice, anti-Black racism, and everything is going to be developing developments that make sense to the community, that is equitable. So I'm just saying, let's see more people, get into this field. And thank you, Alicia, Christopher,
Thank
Jason, all of
you.
you guys for doing this work and, getting these conversations out there.
But yeah, I think the urban planning is so important. Maybe I do my other shame.
Critical urban planning, I would
Yeah,
add
yeah,
though,
Critical.
because there's a
That's
lot
right.
of
yes,
urban planning
yeah,
education that's just status quo
yeah.
Right.
sentiment.
Yeah,
That's true.
exactly. I
Yeah.
think that's what I was gonna talk about that because like Charmaine, I'm gonna do my shameless plug. Of being a part of PO Environmental Youth Alliance, and then we did like an event on urban planning 2 days ago, and we kind of talk about like it's so important for diversity in the planning space. I think I talked to you
Absolutely.
guys about my experience I had with planners. Maybe
Hmm. Just
quick
sitting in
so
planning classrooms as a
yeah.
Black student is
Mm,
whoa.
yeah, it's just like maybe for the audience, a quick summary. I went to a conference and they were talking about sustainability planning, and in during grad school, and I was talking with my friends that this is not sustainability planning. This is sustainable planning for the rich, for the
There you go.
affluent.
Yeah, that's
There you
And
right.
go.
then I asked a question in the Q&A, and mind you, the whole entire panel are white men.
Yeah.
It was like 5 or 6 white men, and I said, and I asked them, um, what kind? It seems like you're planning your sustain. I put quote unquote because it's not sustainable. Your sustainable planning initiatives are only for rich people. And where are is there anything of you're doing anything for marginalized, racialized communities, or low income communities, are so to have actual sustainable society, they need to be incorporated. Because I feel like a lot of times people are now using the sustainability terms as just a marketing, and they do not know what sustainability is. They maybe know the environmental, economic, but it tends to ignore the social aspect of sustainability. And I'm not kidding. They were silent for 15 seconds. And the person disrespect me, say I don't know nothing about public policy, say like public policy does not treat people differently. And I know you never studied public policy. And I was sitting there and I say to my friend, these are the leaders. These are the ones that are doing all the development. And then we wonder why we're in this situation. Because they
There you
don't
go.
know anything. And they're saying like public policy doesn't treat people differently. Of course, it's not gonna blatantly say, but it's execution of the people's interpretation of
That's
it.
right.
It's like I was like this, and even the odds like these are the leaders, and this is what we've been talking about, and that's why we're showing you like it's so. I think a lot of times no one realized the importance of getting involved in urban planning, and
Absolutely.
I didn't realize the importance of urban planning until I got to grad school, like how that has such big factors, especially urban planning. Elisa, like you said, like. I took the some of the urban planning
Same.
courses
I took
are
all of them.
because
There you
you were
go.
in the
Yeah, I did
plan.
ecological economics and planning. Yeah.
Yes. So
Right.
I did the two of them, and it's just like you're like the
Yeah.
one, you're like the
Yeah.
one or two black students
Mm-hmm.
in there,
Mm-hmm.
it's just
Right.
like very interesting. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that just touches on like one of the threats that we were talking about earlier, like just not taking action is going to lead to climate catastrophe,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
going to hurt our communities more. The rich and the powerful, they're
right.
going to be able to pay for their safety and their
That's
comfort
right. Yes.
while we're
Right.
out, you know, drowning in flood.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
That's
it's so
right.
true.
maybe
And can we have
oh,
more ownership too? I really want to see more people in our community look at ownership of land and spaces so that when it comes to developing, we're developing spaces that will nurture our community. Like I look at Little Jamaica, for example. If you look at Little Jamaica now and then look pictures of it in the 80s, it looks the same. And right now, because of COVID, a lot of people are losing their their space because
Mm.
they don't own it.
Mhm.
And do you think if everybody starts losing their space, they're not going to make it easy for them to stick around, right? And once people lose their space, that space is going to be renovated
Mm-hmm.
and freshened up and look amazing. And then is our community going to be able to afford to get a space in there to own a business, right? A lot of the people that are renting there right now wouldn't be able to afford it. So I think we have to be very mindful. If a lot of the tenants there, some of the tenants there have been there for 20, 30 years. Imagine how much, how many times over they paid for that property, right? So I would love to see, especially in Brampton, developers in our community creating spaces that are lead to more ownership for stores, for houses. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I really question that. It makes me really concerned because you see it all the time. Some landlords push the people out and they have that place earmarked for a new condo and they're just waiting for all of the people to default on their rent. And it's happening now with COVID. How many businesses are going out of business?
Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
love that you bring up Little Jamaica. It's not just COVID, it's also that LRT expansion nonsense,
Yes.
that
yeah,
Yes.
construction that is going on forever and ever. Those poor business owners who are commercial
yeah.
renters are also getting kicked out of that neighborhood.
I
exactly.
live around the LR. I live beside the LR.
Yeah.
The Eglinton. I live right beside it, so I've seen all of
Yeah.
that.
And those, if we own that, if we said, okay, I know it might have been possible, but if we had areas that we actually owned it and we knew that there was high order transit moving through that area, you know how much your real estate is going to cost? You've just earned millions of dollars just because of that high order transit, right? So we have to start thinking that way. Which spaces of land and properties can we buy, knowing what the future of that area is going to look like, what the city is going to do? I will just say, if anybody looking at Queen Street, Brampton, please, if you are young and you're looking to invest, Queen Street, Brampton is the highest, busiest transit corridor, and it's all a part of. They're looking to do some major redevelopment in that area. I don't know exactly what's for sale and what's not right now, but if you're looking into investing, these are areas, and I need more of our community to start thinking like that. Where can we invest?
Yeah.
And yeah, so.
And for those of us who can't afford to individually, you know, I also take the example of the Parkdale Community Land Trust as a great
Yes.
model,
Mm.
you know, like coming
Yes.
together as community to hold this land, to decide, you
Yes.
know, what
Okay.
happens here. So I
Yes.
really encourage you to look them up. It's really great work they're doing there.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. What
Yeah.
about it? Didn't that same thing happen in the I want to say beer district, but that's not what it's called. Distillery district.
Right.
Wasn't that the
I
same
think, yeah, I
model?
think there's something similar. I'm not as
Yeah.
familiar, but I think it's similar.
So just think about that. Brampton has a lot of old factories. You know what I mean? Zonings changes, So the zoning changes, especially in my ward, Steeles and Bramley area. Go is already looking to have two-way all day go, and so all of these areas have had the zoning changing. I just think we need to start thinking about, okay, ownership, 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 and getting those positions like urban planners, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
I
I
just
think we
asked.
just got. Oh,
Oh, go ahead. No,
I
just
just
ask
like
Jason if there's room for a couple of questions.
Yeah,
or
I-
that's
comments.
exactly what I was gonna say. We've been
that's what
talking so long.
that's what
I
exactly I
know.
was
I'm
gonna
sorry.
say.
I'm a
Okay.
blah blah blah. I'll
Oh,
keep
no,
talking
no,
if I
no need.
can.
No, no need. That's okay.
No,
Good
great
discussion.
conversations. We had great conversations. One question that was asked is, as a panel of incredible involved communities or background in sustainability, community building, what advice would you give to youth in Peel region and how to take action in their own communities?
Mhm. Give your counselor a call, or and especially, yeah, I would say give me a call. You can give me a call because I will definitely be looking at what organizations to link you to, and you know, just give me a call. There's so many ways that you can get involved, because your counselor should have a pulse on what organizations are operating in their community. I could tell you organizations from this council all the way to mental health supports and yeah, you name it. We have a great group called PAL, People Against Litter, and that's what they do. They're looking for young people to find new ways to develop a media campaign to get their communities that they're working in more engaged around cleaning up their neighborhood and changing the way they interact with their environment. So there are ways. Just you can give me a call. I'd love to connect you with whoever I can connect you with based on your interests.
I totally relate to, we tend to have the perception as young people that our representatives are these, super busy, high strung, like don't want to hear from us and super out of touch, like we can't reach out to them. But, like Charmaine is saying, like literally just call them, follow them on Twitter, like join their newsletter. Like they're so open and willing to meet with us and chat with us. And it's always surprised me, which is sad. But yeah, you'll be surprised too. Just reach out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of the example of, either creating spaces or finding spaces for your voices to be heard. I think of the climate strike that happened at Queen's Park that was led by young activists from across the province, making their voices heard about the urgency of climate justice and climate change. And so there's so many different ways and points at which to connect, depending on what you're particularly passionate about. So along the same themes of these conversations, get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We have a question in a chat box from Trudy. I once heard the statement that the best solution to climate change is to ensure employment, especially for young people. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you think this might impact our decision around COVID and economic planning in our future?
Wow.
That's a big one.
That sounds like a thesis topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how like so I do my a whole
Yeah.
research.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I think,
oh, no, you go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, COVID has impacted employment for everyone across the board. So, drastically. And then youth have been, getting this double impact, especially those who are now getting out of school, now trying to start their careers. And like, lots of people are just not hiring or laying off people. But I think, I absolutely agree that, we need to ensure employment. But I think there are opportunities for us to create our own employment. I don't think everybody should go out and be an entrepreneur, but, like start a nonprofit, run for council, run for parliament, and look at, the sustainable green jobs of the future. I think another thing we need to be doing as a society when we think about, this just transition is how are we retooling, the workers that already exist working in oil and fossil fuels for this, but also how are we like rethinking, like what are those opportunities that are going to be coming up in a society that requires, a movement away from fossil fuels, and, what are those industries that are going to be developed, and how can we train ourselves and build those organizations and businesses and institutions for that future.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just add to that and encourage people. Also, this is a good time for us to, I know I'm going to be that parent, that person, to reflect. This is a good time to sit and watch and see what issues are glaring and need input and change. And employment is definitely one of them, but I would want you to look at connecting with some organizations that are good with pairing young people with volunteer opportunities, and also bridging services that allow them to kind of explore based on what they're seeing, what you're seeing out there, and what the needs are, bridging you to companies that are catering to that need. So I know we want to. It's a important top of mind to seek employment to get and get into the workforce. But this right now, it's difficult for everybody to find employment because our work, it's just in such a state of flux and chaos right now. So where I just want to encourage people to just take a pause right now. And the beautiful thing was right now, because you're forced to be still, these kind of conversations are happening in so many different platforms as well. And the government, and Chris and Alicia, I'm sure you could talk about other platforms and conversations that are happening that you've been invited to. Listen to what some of these politicians are saying. Listen to what some of these key activists in the community are saying. They are wanting to do talks right now because they know people are starting to listen. Right? You have no choice right now. Just sit and listen. I don't know if that's helpful. That keeps coming to my mind lately. I think we just need to take it in.
Yeah.
And I think COVID has really forced us to reevaluate what jobs, how jobs are valued. Like when we
Mhm.
looked at young workers working in grocery stores, example, before the pandemic, is precarious, low wage work. All of a sudden, overnight, you're essential workers. We need to give you a wage increase.
That's
And then
right.
when it's like, okay, let's go back to normal, it's like, let's cut the wage increase we just gave you. So it really speaks about the politics of who's valued, how they're compensated. And so really it speaks to the necessity for young workers for have a greater voice in our economy as well, and jobs.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Like one last question. In terms of mental health and wellness as a part of environmental racism, or are some solutions in that space? What can be done in ease the weight of emotional labor on the Black community? Wow.
Mm, that's a good question. I go back to this Canadian system being neglectful. Um, how do you work with a person or a child that's being neglected? You pay attention. You work with them. You feed them, right? You do the opposite of neglect them. And I think right now in our mental health systems, to some extent, I would say it's been neglected for a long time. And also, our health, being so reactive and not preventative, we're realizing that we have to be active. COVID has really shown us that isolation is not good for our mental health.
Mm-mm.
How many people are suffering right now with sadness? How many more people are drinking more often? How many more people are, just are coming down with illnesses because of lack of vitamin D? So we have to change the way we live and the way we think, in that we have to start realizing how important our mental health is and how important the mental health system is. If we don't nurture our mental health, you won't have a workforce. That's the way I see it. You just won't have a workforce. Every company needs a healthy person, mind, body, and soul, to work for them. Uh, and and without that, your economy can't grow. If it, like, it goes back to even the sick days. What's going to kill our economy? Well, sick people.
Yes.
Sick
Yep.
people. Your factories isn't going to run if you have 25% of your workforce home sick,
That's right.
right? So we have to take care of ourselves. And yeah, I think any government, anybody, whoever decides to take on the role of working with mental health, is got to prioritize it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I think the only way they'll see that is if you call it human capital. Maybe have the word capital, they will understand that
Yeah,
concept.
you're absolutely right. Human capital.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and I guess that's kind of end for our Q&A portion. I want
Okay.
like take it back to Mike. They're facilitating developing this great, insightful event.
Thank you very much, Jason, and thank you, speakers, for that amazing conversation. It was truly outstanding. Now we're going to hear from our head of community, the CCC's head of community outreach and a member of our board, Sonia. She's going to give our outro.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you to our panelists. And thank you to Jason for all of the time you spent today in organizing the panel and working on the questions. And, you know, it's one thing to answer questions on a panel, but for the energy that you had and for being able to really sync off of one another the way that you did and being able to share your raw, authentic stories with us, I think is so impactful. So thank you so much for the time you spent today. I just wanted to remind everybody that the CCC is a nonprofit and 100% volunteer-led organization. We are able to put on events such as this with the generous donations from our donors and our community members and sponsors. There's a QR code there that will take you to our website and also our donation page. We will link that in the chat box as well. Donations as little as $5 really helps us with things like our Zoom account and just working on our technology to promote our events and really get them out in the community. We also have really exciting events coming up as well. As a part of International Women's Day, we have a Young Leaders panel on Thursday. And next Saturday, we also have a speed networking event with the leads of the CCC. So once again, I'd like to thank everybody on the events team, everybody on council, as well as Jason and our three panelists for joining us today. And I look forward to connecting with you all again in the future.
You, Sonia, for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. We all
a
need to
pleasure.
connect again, Alicia,
You
Christopher.
know,
Yeah.
the
We need to
Poetry
talk.
Jazz Club. We got
Right? Oh,
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm so down. Yes.
All right.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Do you guys have Instagram handles or something that I can
Yep.
connect
Oh,
with you
yeah.
all? Let
Yeah.
me put mine in the chat, and
Yeah.
then if you
I'll
guys
put
can do
mine
the
in the
same.
chat too.
So that's my Instagram. That's the easiest way to send me a message, I find. Oh, and that's me on Twitter, but yeah.
I'm trying to be better at Twitter.
Yeah.
All right.